this is not the 80s anymore. Today, any piece of software that is non-trivial and that is actually useful is not developed by a lone superstar engineer in the corner. It's developed by big organizations of multiple engineers working together. And sometimes people are not aligned. Sometimes people have different understanding. They have different stakes in the project. So there will be tension. There will be frustration. It's perfectly normal. And as I said, I think that a good manager is in charge. It's not in charge of the processes or the solutions. They're in charge of the culture.
My guest today is Joe Rahmi. I've known Joe for about 5 years and we probably met in person a couple of times. Most of our engagement has been happening online through a number of online communities. Joe was first exposed to his programming language in college, so unlike the traditional technical story nowadays that people start programming when they were 10 or 8 or 7. Joe's passion started when he was around 20 years old. After playing with his first Linux distribution, that's basically when he realized he wants to spend the majority or the entirety of his career working in tech. He briefly worked as a web developer and later on joined the enterprise world as an integrator, packager, system administrator, and lastly as a quality engineer before doing a transition to engineering management. Since 2019, Joe manages a team of engineers at Red Hat, mainly working on OpenStack. Besides work, Joe enjoys playing multiple instruments. He is a rock and jazz connoisseur, and he has a huge passion for games. He has 2 children, and they are taking on most of his free time nowadays. So let's jump right in for this really awesome fireside chat. All right, Joe, thank you very much for making the time to get with me on this episode. I'm very happy that you are here. We've known each other for 5 years now, but mostly online.
Thank you for having me. It's really cool. I really like the channel. I really enjoy the things you're doing. I'm happy that you're providing so much content. I'm happy that you're keeping it up. I know that starting a channel is considerably easier than actually keeping the channel going. So it's really fun to be part of this. And if an interesting conversation can come out of it, I'm so on.
I'm sure we will have a very interesting one, especially with the topic today. It's about engineering management and how could someone get into that track, because there's a lot of also friction when software engineers want to go into management. Some of them are pushed into the field, some others are groomed into it, others make it a plan of their own. So let's first start with some of your beginnings, right? You weren't always a manager, obviously. You started at Red Hat, currently you are, and you started as a quality engineer, if I'm not mistaken. Was that your first role there?
Yeah, that was my first role in Red Hat. Before this, I had different positions. Not in Red Hat, not in OpenStack. I never really had a developer's position. I always worked around developers. Like I did one internship that was really interesting where I was a web dev where we had one website to maintain. But then slowly but surely, I always gravitated around developers. So sometimes it was integrators, sometimes it was some sysadmin offshoot, a lot of packaging, a lot of dealing with source control, merging, building, deployment. Ultimately, I landed in quality engineering, which I liked it because testing is always special. You need a special way of thinking. And also, I've always had a really good relationship with the developers. So having a human communication relationship with the developers makes for better testers, I think, because you get to learn a lot more and you get to understand a lot more what they're going for and how you can prove them wrong. And if you prove them wrong, how to phrase it in a way that it's not against you. I'm doing you a favor. I'm showing you something you have overlooked. I'm not proving that you're bad. So setting all these things was interesting. And this is how I ended up in quality engineering.
Awesome. Do you feel like your development background helped you become a better quality engineer because you sort of had a hands-on experience with the development process, so on and so forth? Or do you feel like did not contribute to anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as a quality engineer, you really benefit from thinking like a developer, from understanding what developers want. And this is not even saying the fact that modern quality engineering is a lot about writing automation and scripts, which is not clicking and trying to manually verify certain things. So there's a programming aspect to the job, but there's also working in tandem with developers. And the better you understand their job, their tools, their process, their way of organizing things, the more you are able to collaborate with them. So this is definitely something that helped.
Awesome. I want to ask about Red Hat specifically and OpenStack, and I'm going to stick a little bit to quality engineering for a bit, because I'm curious, how does an organization of this size test something as large as an operating system or as OpenStack, right? Look, how is this approached?
Well, okay, so this is a very complicated topic where actually we could maybe spend 2 hours just talking about this and still not cover everything. And to be honest, we don't even have the answers to all the challenges that we are. A lot of the things, a lot of the difficulties that you perceive are correct, and we don't have perfect solutions for them. But in short, the first thing to understand about OpenStack is that it's an open source project, which means that all the development processes and the build and the a lot of the QA is done separately from Red Hat. It's done from what we call the upstream. It's a community of developers, of testers, of all sorts of profiles working together on the code. So in a way, we inherit a lot of our testing from what the upstream community is doing. Now, I say inherit as if they're completely separate people, but Red Hat is part of the upstream community. Therefore, a lot of the upstream testing, which is supposedly different than what we're doing, is done by Red Hatters. So we test the upstream first, and then once we package our downstream builds, we test them separately. The type of testing that you do upstream and that you do downstream is very different. Upstream, you test the code, you test the implementation, you test, does this make sense? Is the logic sound? Is it doing what we should be doing? But also, you're testing things against minimal fake deployments that are often stubs and mocks and just testing specific parts of the code. Downstream, a lot of the emphasis is put on testing the integration between the different components. So all of a sudden we have RHEL, we have our container runners, we have our SDN solutions. We're not supporting all the possibilities in the upstream, and they're separately they're separate projects. They're developed separately. So what we do downstream is we have access to bigger parks, more nodes, more physical hardware, and then we start testing all this integration with the different projects. We pin down specific versions. We're not just testing that your scheduler algorithm is correct. This is something that is typically tested in the upstream. But in the downstream, we're testing that this version of libvirt works with this version of Podman that is working with RHEL or whatever. This is what we tend to do downstream.
Mapping all of these things and, oh my God, doing this. Like, I can't even imagine or fathom the coverage that you have to make sure that everything is functioning as it should be. All right, we're gonna switch to our topic of the day. And I think in 2019, you did the transition to engineering management. Did you decide to transition yourself, or was this like the only available option for growth for you?
So to be honest, neither. So obviously the first thing is in Red Hat, and I can only speak about Red Hat, you have plenty of opportunities to grow as an engineer who wants to remain outside of management. And there are plenty of opportunities. There is nothing that will actually force you into management. This being said, in my experience, in my personal path, in my personal journey, my manager was really pushing me to become a manager myself, to join him. His team was growing out of control. He needed to delegate a lot of the management tasks because he was growing. He had over 20 people. He was managing over 20 people, and we were still hiring.
Wow. Okay.
And he needed to have lieutenants. So he was explicitly telling me, I want you to be my assistant manager. I want you to be the assistant manager. And at the time I was a bit undecided. I still had aspirations to be very technical. And also I still struggled a lot with the idea of how does a manager add value to the team? It often feels, especially when you're not considering management challenges, You think that the job of a manager can be automated. The job of a manager is just reporting, and
it's useless, and it's overhead. It's
And it took me a long time. Like to this day, I have to very often think, like, me as a manager, how am I adding value to this?
Okay.
Now, the good part was in Red Hat, every manager, old, new, long-time engineer, long-time manager, when we joined the management team at first, we take a 9-month course of managing the Red Hat way. And this course is not perfect. I have a lot of criticism towards it, but the truth is, putting you in contact with other managers who are discovering things, a lot of them are ex-engineers, long-time engineers, a lot of them are long-time managers from other companies. Being in contact with them and sharing stories and sharing strategies started making me like see that there are patterns. There are some ways where, okay, I see how in this case a good manager made a difference. I see how in this case a bad manager made a negative impact. And I see how management is something that helps engineer. And I started understanding a little bit how to add this value that I was always looking for.
Got it.
Now in Red Hat, you always have the opportunity to switch back to engineering, and a bunch of our managers do this.
Interesting. I want to stop you here because I'm curious about one thing before we move on. So how does the career path look like for an engineer? Is there a track that goes on? Is there in terms of growth in parallel to management? Like, can you grow as an engineer in parallel to a manager, get the same pay or even higher or lower? I don't know.
Absolutely.
How does it look like?
I'm not completely familiar with the org and how it is, partly because it changes all the time, but partly because it is also loosely defined, because every individual will have a slightly different path than others. But if you want to push into engineering without going into management, the type of expectations and responsibilities that you have are going to transform. So as a more junior or even standard engineer, you will be given specific tasks and be expected to achieve them. As you grow into what we call the principal engineers and the senior principal engineers and maybe the distinguished engineers, those are higher levels of engineers. First of all, these guys, they earn more than I do, and they should earn more than I do, because they're far more impactful than I am. Their responsibilities tend to be about how can we affect Red Hat products across the board. So one example would be about a few years ago, about maybe 2-3 years ago, we decided to move away from Docker as our container runtime.
Yeah.
These decisions, they had to affect all our products. We couldn't possibly be selling OpenShift running Docker and OpenStack not running Docker. It had to take into consideration all the product, all the integration of our portfolio together. This is where distinguished engineers would actually look into these problems and think about, how do we do this? Do we continue with Docker? Do we come up with our own homebrew solution? Are there other solutions that we can explore? And how well will it integrate through all the products? Right. A lot of their work is proof of concept. A lot of their work is exploration. A lot of their work is open source participation in these upstream communities.
Definitely, because they hold so much depth that like literally no one else has that much depth in the product, in the technology, in the know-how, in the experience, in the wisdom, so on and so forth. Yeah, I can imagine why they're so valuable. Is there anything that you miss about your previous position, like after you moved to management?
Oh, wow. So the obvious one is, of course, spending time in your code editor. So I still do, and it's not that I don't, but I don't do as much, and I don't usually participate in the heated reviews, which is what I missed probably the most. Like when you had something that was contentious and a lot of people had their own opinion, and being in the heat of the battle, being like on the battlefield, just taking everybody's opinion, trying to find compromises, trying to find who's making sense, who's not making sense. Now I take a step back, and I'm more a facilitator. Even though I have my opinion, I don't chime in as strongly, as vigorously as I used to. So that there's this for sure. But there's also in general, I miss I miss being able to talk to the team without being the manager, like maybe participating in rumors, or maybe giving my opinion, or maybe giving someone encouragement without it having the subtext of this is your manager talking to you. And it's slightly different where, and even a bunch of these guys I had been working with for 2, 3, 4 years before, and all of a sudden I'm their manager. And all of a sudden when I make a joke, or when I make a sarcastic comment, or if I participate in a rumor, which I cannot really do, gossip, I cannot do these things anymore because my word is different than what it used to be. So there's this aspect that kind of I miss, being able to speak much more freely and goof off.
Yeah, you were closer to the team, and now like your words hold much more weight. You have in a way to be the role model, but also like present the company for the engineers in many ways. Yeah, I can understand where this is coming from. I want to switch a little bit to the meta and talk a little bit about what makes a great manager, right? I'm gonna dissect this topic in different questions, and I'm gonna start with something you already touched upon. But Google ran an experiment. They called it Project Oxygen, I think in 2002, and the experiment stated that there was an underlying feeling that managers or project managers, program managers, whatever you want to call them, are just overhead. They don't add any value. They just add to the bureaucracy, and engineers can literally self-manage if they are up to a certain level of competence and experience, and they don't really need anyone to babysit them, if I am to say it that way. However, the experiment failed miserably, and it only lasted a few months. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think about the experiment and the outcomes?
So it's the experiment that they tried not having any manager for large teams.
So they took out all the managers for a few teams, and then they tried to observe what was going on. And yeah, it failed miserably. The people were in disarray. There was no one directing the vision of what they were working on. There was no communication flowing properly, no coordination, nothing of that sort.
Yeah, it is. It is scary to think that no one would be managing a team of, say, 30, 40, 50 engineers. It's you have to wonder, how are they synchronizing? How are they aligning? Or most importantly, how are they addressing the things that nobody's addressing? This is something that, as a manager, you're constantly thinking about. Like, we have this problem, we've been dragging this problem for 2 years. What are we going to do about it? For instance, my style of management, and again, I cannot speak about management in general. I can speak about Red Hat specifically, and not even then. I can speak about my own corner of Red Hat, because Red Hat is vast. So probably other people have different circumstances, and it's unfair to say that what I have experienced is universal. But my style of management has always been that, look, we have engineers, let them engineer. I'm not going to out-engineer the engineers. That's not my role. And even to a certain extent, my role is not to give the solution to a technical problem. My role is not even to give a solution to how are the processes and how are we organizing ourselves. But where I have a lot of impact is how do we shape the culture into something that makes sense? So for instance, some very concrete examples, we had people who are afraid of saying, I don't know, or I didn't understand. And we end up figuring out that some people haven't understood the problem correctly very close to the deadline.
Interesting.
As a manager, this is something that you can solve that nobody else can. And the fact that you can actually solve these things can have a lot of positive impact on the long term. So how can we set up a culture where we make sure that everybody understood the problem? How can we set up a culture where we considered that everybody has the resources available and not find out this in the middle of the run?
Yeah.
How can we make sure that someone has all the opinions are being listened to correctly? Now it takes a special set of skills to be this person, because my engineers wouldn't listen to me if I didn't show that I know their work. And I'm in the very privileged position of having done the work for about 7 years, and I know very well the ins and outs of what they're doing. So when I let them do the things the way they want to do, and I say, hey, but we haven't listened to this person, or we're not taking that aspect into account, I know what I'm talking about in a good way. So well, basically, if you want to talk about this experiment that of not having manager, I will say it's easy to have bad managers too. It's a slippery slope, and bad management can happen. Having good managers is obviously a very important thing, and good managers will impact the engineers without imposing their own vision, but will enable the engineers into doing engineering in the best way possible.
So what are the qualities of a great manager? Thank you for pushing in that direction. That was my next question for you.
The qualities of a good manager, it's a very human position. So empathy is very important. Understanding when someone is talking, I try not to think about what is good for me. Try to think about what is their context, where are they coming from, and can I make a difference? Sometimes it doesn't mean just do everything that your team is asking, but it means really understand what is your team asking and why are you asking this, and will it change something? Sometimes it's understanding that they're asking something without phrasing it as a question or a request. So this aspect of empathy is very important. You need to have, I think, a thick skin, because you're going to hear a lot of people complaining about things that maybe you disagree with. So being able to turn this into, to give a positive spin on things means that you cannot be affected by someone who's always complaining that this thing doesn't work or that other team is unreasonable, something like this.
That's very common and between engineers. I mean, if I am I don't want to overgeneralize, obviously, but like that is because we're critical in our work, right? We look for these faults and then we try to voice them out whenever we can.
Yeah, I think so. And also I think that in today, like this is not the 80s anymore. Today, any piece of software that is non-trivial and that is actually useful is not developed by a lone superstar engineer in a corner. It's developed by big organizations of multiple engineers working together. And sometimes people are not aligned. Sometimes people have different understanding. They have different stakes in the project. So there will be tension. There will be frustration. It's perfectly normal. And as I said, I think that a good manager is in charge. It's not in charge of the processes or the solutions. They're in charge of the culture of, hey, we listen to these guys. Hey, we try to understand what is the challenge here or whatever. Just observing, empathy, observing. So these are important. I think a certain level of curiosity is also important in the sense of when you hear an engineer say something you didn't expect, don't dismiss it and be very naturally curious about what they said and be like, okay, you know what? I want to try what you say. Maybe set an hour aside or maybe an afternoon aside to say that thing that you told me that seems completely crazy. Maybe I'll try it. Maybe I'll see what you mean. And I think that the good managers tend to do this. And
as you're talking about these things, I'm also reflecting about on my manager at work, and I'm also seeing a lot of these qualities already in him, which is really interesting to hear from you and your perspective on them. Okay, so these are like diverse skill sets, right? Empathy, having a thick skin, natural curiosity, so on and so forth. Do you think good managers are born, or are they trained to be good managers? And if they are trained, does your organization, for example, provide this type of training, and does it invest in you, or is this more of your own personal initiative?
Yeah, so I think it's obviously it's like everything. I think it's a mix of the two. I really believe that even if you're not born with it, you can learn it. I also believe that for people like me, it came more naturally than not being like this. So I am very aware that it was easier for me. My wife, she always jokes about this. She says, you always wanted to be a superstar engineer, but it looks like you're so much more fit to be an engineering manager. And it pains me a little bit to think about this, but it's true. It's true that I'm naturally better at listening to people. And this being said, I believe that Red Hat helped me a lot by giving this training that I mentioned earlier. And in general, I think organizations should train their managers, whether it's an engineer transitioning to management or whether it's a new manager coming from a different culture into your culture. I really think that management is about culture. I really, really believe this. So if you expect them to figure things out on their own, it's a recipe for frustration. It's a recipe for massive frustration. And the training that you have to bring is it's not just give them books and studies and give them white papers to hear. It's just put them in contact with other managers, put them in contact with people who are familiar with this culture, start conversations, start exchanging ideas, start putting situations like, what would you do in this situation? What would you do in that situation? Or share actual experiences. I've had this situation. I did this. What could I have done differently? This is the sort of training that will make you be a good manager because it will force you to think, how am I adding value? How am I making a difference here? How maybe I shouldn't have done anything and a manager has no value to add, but just simply thinking about this, you're already understanding the role better, you're understanding the challenges better. And yeah, I really believe that I'm lucky that Red Hat gave us this training. And I think that organizations that don't give the training it's wishful thinking.
9 months, wow.
Naive.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen a lot of, I personally, for example, was pushed into a couple of management roles when I was not ready. And it was a disaster for everyone involved, myself included, because when you approach dealing with humans as if you are solving a problem, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's why I think what you're talking about is super valuable. The human element of all of this is at the core, I think, of really good engineering managers.
That's the joke I always say is like humans, they don't come with a manual. It's not like you can read the solution. Did they not give you any training? They expect you to just figure out things on your own.
Figure it out as you go, just wing it with people. And these are human beings at the end of the day. These are the biggest asset that any organization has. Like, you cannot just throw anyone and say, okay, go manage this group of people, no matter how technically knowledgeable you are. These are completely separate things. And I'm really glad that organizations are getting more and more aware of all of this, that these need to be separate. I often hear from managers, and I've heard it multiple times throughout my career, specifically from managers who are non-technical, that having technical knowledge or technical depth is not necessary to manage an engineering team, right? Do you believe it's necessary for an engineering manager to be technical and have a certain level of depth? Or do you feel like someone who has all of these great manager skills, but does not have the technical knowledge, can they manage a team of engineers? Will he or she be listened to? Will they be able to facilitate the work of engineers, or that's impossible?
It's a difficult question. Again, I cannot think of the position in very universal terms, because I've only really had a single management experience, which is my current one.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, I've only really worked in a single team for 80% of my career. I don't know how things are outside. I'll say this though, having solid technical knowledge, but not just in general, specific to the product that I'm working on, specific when the processes that I'm working on, understanding exactly how we send things on Git for review, what is the good amount of reviewing that we want to do, what is the good aspect that we, how we deal with a third-party library, how do we assess it, what are our practices, how do we read the code, the fact that I am very familiar with these things is central to my way of management. And I couldn't do this if I didn't have this technical background, which is a double-edged sword, because sometimes I worry that am I too tied to the current position. If I were to move and go work on something that isn't cloud computing, that is just some like web application somewhere, am I going to be clueless? Am I going to need to learn all the technical things, or can I be able to start managing without being a manager? I don't know. These are some of the challenges that I'm dealing with. But I'll say just that for me, the idea that you don't have the technical knowledge and you still want to manage it sounds scary. I would be very afraid of doing this. This being said, I am not saying I would be the best engineer on my team. Some people think that as a manager, I should be able to do everything that my engineers do and better. I think that's not the case. I just need to be able to do what they do if I needed to, but I expect them to do it better than me because they're doing it 24/7 and I'm
Obviously,
focusing
yes.
on something else.
100%. For some reason, I feel like, and again, I don't want to fall into the trap of overgeneralizing, but I'm going to derive from my personal experience. I feel like engineers tend to listen to technical authority in many ways. And I'm not saying that the manager, you should manage with authority, but they tend to listen to people who know more than they do. And I'm not sure why this hierarchy develops naturally, or this is maybe a cultural thing. But I've observed it and I've seen it in numerous locations. Why do you think this is the case? Like,
I mean, the way I think about it, the way I think about it, listen, if you have to do some technical assignment, you have to, I don't know, in my work, it's like write a CI job, for instance, and it's not ready for whatever reason. And your manager says, what's going on? And like, pardon the term, but you give him some bullshit. You give him some like 2-bit reason, and he accepts it. He accepts it. He starts like reporting that, this is blocked because something that is like very obviously not the reason why. It becomes difficult for you in the future to take anything or stuff they say a bit seriously. Or I don't know if that's the case, but I'll word it differently. I'll say, if you give him bullshit and he calls you on it immediately on the spot, says what you say doesn't make sense, and he opens the text editor and he walks you through the code and he says, no, that's the thing, and what are you talking about? The relationship changes. The relationship says, it's a little bit of technical authority. It's like, he knows what he's talking about. And I try to word these things not in a way of like, hey, I caught you, just go sit in the corner. More like, hey, this is the problem. We can work on it together. If this is something that you don't understand, maybe I can help. I am familiar with this area of the code. I can give you the documentation. I can put you in contact with the team who knows these things. Always wording things constructively and not like, aha, I caught you. It can help, but it's important to show them that technically you're sound. Or look, you don't have to be on top of everything, but the obvious bullshit you should not pass through you. I think the very obvious thing now sets the tone immediately. People start respecting you. People start actually going at you for solutions. And this is something that is funny also in my management style. Very often engineers, they come to me and they go, we tried this didn't work. We tried that other thing. We don't have the resources for it. And then this third team, they said they couldn't do that. What should we do? And my response has always been like, you tell me what should we do? Like, you're the engineer. You tell me, what do we do? And I'll make it happen. So there's this thing about a good manager, they shovel the shit away so that the engineers can do the things that they envision. So you need some paperwork, you need some access to hardware, you need some licenses, you need some things. I'll take care of it. But you tell me what the solution is. You think of the solution, take ownership of it, and then I can help.
Don't come to me with problems, but come to me with like maybe a problem definition and your perspective on a solution. And then I can facilitate this and facilitate you getting to that endpoint or to get across the finish line. Interesting. Okay, I want to talk about engineering management at the organization level and at scale, right? So it's a tricky, controversial topic of how we can measure developer productivity, for example. So I'm not going to get into that. I want to talk about engineering managers' success. Are there any indicators that can be used to measure the efficacy or the success of an engineering manager? How does Red Hat do it? Do you actually do it even?
If you're thinking metrics, I'll tell you immediately we don't. I think we have at its simplest form, we have one-on-one performance reviews with our direct managers, and that's about everything we do officially. So this is where it ends, and I don't think that it's a very good way of measuring performance. But in general, and this is maybe a crude way of saying it, if the product is doing well, then the team are probably doing well. And if someone is not performing well, they have to be performing very badly for actions to be taken. But this is a very superficial view of how things are. In practice, Red Hat has such a strong culture of being self-driven. Everybody's expected to take initiatives all the time, and everybody is taking initiatives all the time. If you're a subpar performer, nobody is working with you. Nobody is actually seeking you out. Nobody is actually interacting with you. So while you won't have, like, as long as if you're doing the absolute bare minimum, your boss is going to say, hey, okay, I have nothing bad to say about you. Here's your like yearly raise or whatever. This is the bare minimum you're going to get, but you're not getting all these work opportunities. You're not getting all these people who want to interact with you. You're not getting all these, initiatives.
So it's very much merit-based, and the system sort of like not cleans up, but like takes care of itself.
Yeah, in a way. And this is all, again, I've been working my whole career in a product that is generating good money for the company. So we're not in a hard position. Like if the product was losing money, maybe things would have been different, but I don't know. Like it's the crude way to put it, but it's working. So people who are here, unless they're very terrible, they're staying.
Yeah. But that's also the reality, right? I mean, I don't want to listen about, I don't think anyone wants to hear the great stories about great companies who promote that they got their shit together, right? There's a lot of chaos in this world. And in many ways, I've seen it in so many organizations that claim to be doing really awesome stuff. They might be, but internally the process is bust, and they're not really, it all bottles down to the fundamentals. As if the business is doing great, everyone will be doing good, right? And they will have the luxury to do a lot of awesome stuff.
Don't misunderstand me. By far, most of the engineers that I work with are amazing people. Like, I'm very humbled by this. And I think that culture, which again, like, this is all I think about, is culture. I think culture is very contagious. It's I learned to be self-driven. I learned to take a lot of initiatives. I learned to be always constructive, because when I joined the team, everybody was already this way. And newcomers, when they join, we make sure that they get also infected by this attitude, by this way of doing things. So, like you say, the system takes care of themselves. Like, the product is doing well because we're doing something right as well. Like, it's not
100%. It doesn't happen by pure luck, of course. No. I mean, I'm saying it's a combination of superior or great engineering talent, but also like interpersonal skills, and many things come together for a company or a product to do really well. But what I'm trying to say, if you could have like the best engineers in the world, right, but put in the wrong time, wrong product, wrong market fit, wrong whatever, right, they're not gonna do well no matter what. Absolutely. And that's where everything will just crumble. Okay, I want to jump from this to talk about, because you mentioned culture, and I love that. Do you believe that an engineering manager can lead a team in a toxic culture? Can they create a bubble for their team to be effective if the rest of the organization is in disarray or not really working well?
Yeah, super fun question, and I think about this a ton. Now, I'm lucky that at large, the company where I work is it has a really positive culture, and so I don't have a lot of things, but I think that if the company was toxic, then my role would have been exactly what you described. It would have been to absorb all the toxicity so that my team doesn't feel it at all, so that they, like, this is again culture, right? Like, if if management is petty, if the products are messing up with the quality engineering, if finance is being uncool or whatever, it's really your job as a manager to absorb all this so that the guys don't know it exists, don't feel it exists, and they can just focus on writing their code, finding their solution, testing the product, whatever it is, engineer, do engineering. I'll take care of the toxic person. I'll take care of this. Focus on doing the amazing things. The way you phrase your question is a very good one. I think that I've had to do it in similar situations, but at a very small scale, because Red Hat is such a beautiful, wonderful company. I have nothing but good things to say about them. But sometimes if a team is being difficult, or if some aspect of the work could devolve into toxicity and pettiness and gossiping and hating, this is where I have to intervene. I have to intervene. This is my number one priority. Don't let the toxicity
spread.
Get into my team. Get into my guy. Like my people, they should always feel like I'm so lucky to work here. It's so beautiful to work here, and it's my job to make it happen.
Interesting. On a personal level, are you more of an introvert or an extrovert? Do you fall into any of these buckets? Oh. And how does this affect your engineering management ability? Do you feel it has an impact or it doesn't?
I don't like these terms because I think that people mean different things when they use them. My understanding of an introvert,
but they have a psychological definition. So what I'm trying to say,
how would you define them?
Yeah, an extrovert is basically a person that takes energy from being around people, from engaging with people, from surrounding themselves with interesting conversations, whatever. An introvert is not a person who doesn't like people, but it's a person that can behave as an extrovert, but at the end of the day, their energy is drained by a lot of social interactivity, let's say, and they feel like they need to recharge by spending some time alone, right?
So that's the definition I have, and in this definition, I 100% identify as an introvert. But I'm not shy. I'm extremely talkative. I am super present in meetings. But if I don't have my 3 hours in the morning where I'm just alone with my calendar, with my emails, with my text editor, with my whatever it is that I'm currently need to organize my thoughts, to take some breath, I will be drained. I will be very tired. My mornings are alone, and they're my recharge time. My afternoons are just meeting, and they're where I spend the energy. And at the end of the day, I'm tired. So if you're thinking in terms of recharge energy and spending energy, I'm an introvert. But if you think in terms of being shy and not speaking up and blah, 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 then no, I speak up. I'm the loudest person in the meeting.
Yeah, definitely. No, definitely. Introversion is more on the energy levels and how do you derive your energy, and how do you where does this energy come from for you? I understand. I'm an introvert myself, and I can fake extroversion really well. Highly sociable, highly talkative, but at the end of the day, I just need my time alone to recharge. Otherwise, next day is not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's there's this expectation that you, as a manager, that you're always just talking with people all the time. And in a way it is, but in another way, like I need this time to think. I need this time to organize myself, especially if the day is going to be a succession of meetings. And this is probably the hardest part of my job. Well, the second hardest part of my job. It's that the context switch is constant. I go in a half-hour meeting, we talk about something, then as soon as it's done, I go in the next half-hour meeting where we talk about something completely different with completely different people. And then it's a succession of just context switch. And this is what it makes it very difficult for me. And this is what drains my energy the most. And the mornings that are quiet time. So the reason why I talk about morning, afternoon is because most of the people that like all of the people that I directly manage, and most of the people that I interact with are in the US time zone, and I'm in Europe. So my mornings are my alone, sacred planning, resourcing time, where it's most of my actual work is done in the morning.
Nice.
And then in the afternoon, I'm on autopilot going from one meeting to the next and just saying the things that I have thought of in the morning.
I understand. Yes, I also have a good part of my team who also operates in the US. And it's a blessing because you get like a good chunk of your day, you know, where you can be productive, you can have focus time, you can just move away from meetings all the time and just focus on getting things done. Okay, that's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about remote work. As a manager, do you feel like physical proximity is necessary for you to effectively manage? Or do you feel like you can do this across time zones and across regions without it hampering your efficacy as a manager?
If we want to talk about my specific situation, I am working for a company that has a very strong remote friendly culture. So the fact that the whole company makes it easy for remote workers, makes my management style easier. If I was alone alone at home while all the company is just in one office and they're used to being in one office, things would have been completely different. So this culture of remote, it's either the whole company's on board or it's not going to work. So this is how I really feel about this. This being said, there's immense value in physical proximity and being all together in the same place, especially if you get to be around the team outside of work hours. Maybe, you know, have a beer afterwards or go to a paintball shooting something. And what we used to do in Red Hat before the whole world closed is that we would try to meet once or twice a year. And we try to make it in different contexts. Sometimes not the whole team would meet, sometimes different like subsets would meet, but I would have physical contact before when I was an engineer with my managers all like several times a year. Again, successful product, so we have the budget for multiple travels a year, so these things are easy, but I really think that if you can afford them, it's one of the most beneficial thing you can do for your team is having them get together all together once or twice a year. The impact is insane. After my first time doing this with my team, I came home and I was like, now I know the guys. Now
the bond is created. You need this personal
absolutely.
bond. I was gonna ask, like, if these trips are not possible, how would you go about creating these bonds virtually? Is this even feasible?
This is as a manager, you have a lot of influence on this. I have a lot of managers who try to do some like game meetings or quiz meetings or this sort of things. I tend to find that they're a bit dorky. Like it's not always fun. Like if you show up and like you ask me a quiz game or what is your favorite color, or like
they just don't.
People aren't very engaged. But just one thing that it was started by one of my engineers, but an engineer from a sister team actually, and we started doing this. Is one guy one day showed up on IRC and just said, "I'm starting a video meeting. I'm just hanging out. Whoever wants to jump in, just come say hi." And this is, for instance, the type of things when I say, as a manager, you want to influence the culture. I started doing it too, and I started telling my people, like, do it from time to time. And now it's become a thing where from time to time, we just open a video call and be like, hey, whoever wants to come by, just drop in.
Yeah.
And these things help. And then you start noticing who is never dropping, who is never coming, who is never participating in these things. What can I do? What can I do to make a difference? What can I do why do they not want to come there? And maybe it's not a bad thing. I have people that I manage. They're very happy keeping it strictly personal and just disappearing. And they're some of my best performers, and I absolutely love working with them. And they have zero interest in sharing personal time or personal whatever. It's fine, so be it. But I need to make sure that this is the case. I need to make sure that it's not like they would like to participate, but they're shy. If the case is that they're shy and they don't know how to engage, maybe I should intervene. I just need to know what it is before I take a decision.
Yeah, maybe someone's overworked and you don't know it. Maybe they're not really saying things about it, and it's nice to learn about these things. Also, I feel like a lot of the cross-pollination and a lot of the good ideas, a lot of the, discovery happens in some of these sessions. We call them water coolers. And sometimes we have them like running the whole day, and whoever wants to jump into this session can just freely do so. And I think I had a lot of the brilliant ideas, for example, from just having casual conversations with people from other teams. It doesn't have to be all about work all the time. It's just a matter of, what are you working on today? Oh, I'm working on this cool thing. Oh, yeah, my customer wants that. Or, oh, I could use this somewhere else. Or, oh, this is really awesome to hear about that we're investing time in this or energy in this and whatever. And I think this is where the value of these things come in.
And you don't need to have dedicated time for this, in the sense that this can actually permeate your regular meetings. So it's not just me, but we make it it's very normal in Red Hat to be in the middle of a meeting and say like, yeah, I'm going to pick up the kids. Or I've had people in meetings be in the middle of their evening run because it's night and they want to do a jogging and it's just their time zone. And in the run, they have to speak for 5 minutes. So yeah, they're panting a bit while they're running, but that's it. Other than this, they're just doing their thing. Or I've actually had people who said like, I'm super sorry, I'm in 2 meetings right now. I wasn't listening to you.
Wow.
Okay. And the point is, understanding that we're not all in the office together. We all have to juggle some things a certain way, and we all have to, it's good if we can be chill around each other. It's good if we can drop a little less formal than we would be in a more office setting where we have to behave a certain way and have more decorum maybe. But now we're at home, be comfortable, be flexible, whatever is convenient for you. And we can talk like teammates and not just be very protocol and now it's time for the meeting, I'm going to wear a suit and just show up and turn on the video or something like this.
100%. Make the workplace like fun for everyone, even if it's a remote work environment.
And convenient and not a chore.
100%. I want to jump to the last question for our conversation today, which I really, really enjoyed so far.
Thanks.
Do you have any tips for software engineers who feel it's time for them to step up to a management position? Like, if you were to do it again, and you're convinced that now is the time for you to step to that type of role, how would you approach it?
If you're in Red Hat, I know what you should do. We have specific courses that you can take. We call it the Aspiring Manager Program. It's a short course. I think it lasts a week or two, and it has like follow-up assignments where you get exposure to a lot of what the engineers are doing, what of the managers are doing, what kind of challenges they have to deal with, and it helps you understand this, if it's for you or not. So this is probably the biggest thing. I would say when I moved to management, the biggest challenge, and to this day it's still my biggest challenge, was dealing with people's salaries, raises, bonuses, these things. Like when you're an engineer, most of what you're saying is like it's fun. I have ideas of what we should do in Jenkins. I have ideas on how we should test this Python thing. It only affects you from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and then you turn off your laptop, you go on your merry way, and you do whatever you want to do. And at worst, I'm just this annoying guy at work with stupid ideas. But now, if I'm in charge of your raise and your bonus, I'm affecting more than this. I'm affecting your weekends. I'm affecting your vacation. I'm affecting your Christmas shopping. I'm affecting things that were new and different to me. This is a bit of the empathy part that I was talking about. Like, I cannot take this decision as lightly as I used to say, hey, we're going to use this library instead of that library. It's like, it's not as likely. If I mess this up, I'm really screwing someone up.
You're affecting humans' lives now. People's lives.
So be aware of these things and think about these things. And if you're confident that these are things that you can do and you have good ideas on how you want to do, start looking at how can a manager flip certain situation around? What would the manager do differently? And then probably the number one thing that I would give as an advice is make it explicit. Say it, tell it to your manager. I want to be a manager someday. I think I can be a good, or I'm interested in the topic. and be patient. Management, transition to management, at least again in Red Hat, it's not something that we give as a validation of your effort. It's when a position open, you'll be considered, but you'll also be in competition with other people who want to be a manager. So it's sometimes it's going to take time. Sometimes you have to be looking for opportunities. But I would say this: I would say first, make it explicit, and two, start thinking in your everyday work, like as a manager, what could I have done? What would a manager do differently? And where did my manager make a mistake or not make a mistake? And these are the type of things that you would do. And then, read up on management, get curious, ask questions, talk to other managers. It's not a very glamorous role. A lot of it is supporting people who are doing fun things. But when you see the team working, having good cohesion, it's a very fun thing to say, hey, we built this together. Like I know how to build this. And promoting people is one of the best feelings in the world. When you give someone a promotion that you have been working with for 2 years, and you set clear goals, and then they do it, and you're like, okay, you're getting this promotion. It's one of the most fun feelings in the world, because you feel like, okay, we're building something real here, and we're building something that is tangible. So,
Joe, this has been really awesome. Thank you very much for your time, your insights, your experience.
Thank you very much for this. Yeah, I had a blast. It was really fun talking with you. And
likewise.
Can't wait to see the episode and then the future episodes on the channel, man.
For sure. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much for watching.